Tuesday, May 11th, 1911. Start your engines. This is the first Indianapolis 500. 40 racers in 40 cars pushed the gas and made their way around the track. I'm assuming it's an oval. I don't watch enough racing to actually know, but this story's worth it, trust me. The winner of the first Indianapolis 500 in 1911 was a man named Ray Haroon. Ray, well, his car went faster than the others. That's why he won. That's how that sort of thing works. But he won for a very specific reason. 39 cars all looked very similar. Ray's car had something different. A rear view mirror. 1911, the first recorded use of a rear view mirror. Ray Haroon was a racer and a mechanic. Now you see all the other cars, they had two seats, one for the driver, one for the mechanic. But Ray's car was a little different. It was a one-seater, making it a little narrower, a little lighter, a little more aerodynamic. Now, the mechanic's purpose was to do mechanical things like filling up gas and fixing flat tires, but the mechanic also looked back to let you know when it was safe to pass. So Ray, without a mechanic next to him, needed some way to see behind him. And thus, the rear view mirror was born. In order to move ahead, Ray needed to look back. To know where you're going, you have to know where you've been. And the way we look at the past, well, it impacts the way we step into our future. Now, the text from the Hebrew reading today, the story of Joseph, I believe it's a story seen in a rearview mirror. Here's what I mean by that. For the past few weeks, we've been following the people of Israel along their journey. And last week, you might remember, we met Jeremiah as he saw the end of Israel's time in their country, the end of their city, the end of their temple, and they were taken off a people in a foreign land in exile. Now, it's when they were in exile that the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, that's when they were finally written down. Up until that point, they'd been simply stories told around the campfire. Remember that time when? And now in exile, they needed a way to find hope for their future, so they need to look at the stories of their past. The story of Joseph is a story glimpsed in a rearview mirror. It's not so much modern history as we understand history. It's more of a cultural narrative, a story that built its way into the DNA of a people. If God was with Joseph then, surely God will be with us now. You see, I like to think that the story is focused on what's true rather than what actually happened. After all, the whole Bible's true, and some of it even happened. What do you do when you find yourself in a foreign land, displaced, dispossessed, everything turned upside down? What do you do when you wake up and hear the news of who won that election? What do you do when the days ahead seem like they are going to be harder and harder to step into? You look back and you remember. You glimpse into that rearview mirror to be reminded of where God has been and to find hope of where God might still be. This is the story of Joseph. Now, the story of Joseph ends, as we heard moments ago, with a reconciliation. 12 brothers, 13 actually at that point, coming together with the sister, 13, all together finally with one another again after 22 long years. If there's ever someone who knew the hopes and fears of all the years, it would be Joseph. His story ends coming with his family, but it begins, well, just as a teenager in that family. Joseph, the youngest of most of his siblings. He had one younger brother. Now you have to understand, Joseph's family was one father, 4 mothers, and 13 kids. I'm pretty sure that's a reality TV show right there. One of the mothers, the first mom, was the first wife of Jacob. Jacob of Jacob and Esau, by the way, for those of you who want to do the backstory later. His first wife wasn't really his favorite wife, but that's where he had most of his kids. The first wife's handmaid also was the mother of a bunch of kids. The second wife was the favorite wife, only she only had 2 kids. The oldest son of the favorite wife was Joseph. Take a look at that family picture the next time someone talks about biblical images of marriage. Whew. 12 brothers. Joseph's 17, and he's the favorite. His dad gives him this technicolored dream coat. Maybe you've heard of that one. And one day his dad sends him out to the fields to go check on his brothers. Now you know that you're setting this 17-year-old up for failure when the older brothers have to go do the work and the 17-year-old just goes to check on them. Come on, Dad, you are not setting him up here. He is just asking to get bullied. Not to mention that the younger siblings in the family, which I was one, we're never annoying to our older siblings, are we? Sorry, Jennifer. Joseph goes to his brothers. His brothers see him coming. Here comes that dreamer, they say. Because you see, Joseph used to have these dreams. And like, the youngest in the family, he thought everyone should hear them. I had a dream where the sun and the moon and the stars all bowed down to me. I had a dream where we were in the field and all the wheat bowed down to me. Yeah, Joseph, you're not winning any points here with your brothers. That dreamer's coming, they say. They see the technicolor dream coat coming from off in the distance. Let's get rid of him. No, let's not do that. I don't know if we should really go that far. What if we just put him in this pit? Okay, we'll put him in a pit. Joseph finds himself at the bottom of an empty well. Moments later, Joseph finds himself sold to some travelers from Midian. Joseph finds himself working without pay in Egypt. Now, the brothers return home with the technicolor dream coat. They add a little animal's blood and tell a lie that will haunt them for decades. Joseph, your favorite son, we don't know what happened. Meanwhile, Joseph finds himself in Egypt. He ends up falsely accused and imprisoned. And it's here that I think the Israelites in exile really feel the story. Joseph at the bottom of a pit. Joseph in prison. Surely this is where the story ends. What future could come after this? And they look at that point in the story and they realize if God was with Joseph in those low moments, well then surely God will be with us in ours as well. But that's not the end of Joseph's story. It continues on, interpreting dreams, seeing an eye for the weather patterns with famines coming. Joseph makes a plan and becomes the VP of all of Egypt. VP is vice pharaoh, by the way. And he ends up setting up the entire country to endure 7 years of famine. Now, this famine affects everybody, including Joseph's brothers and father. And that's where we see the story today. With Joseph's brothers coming for food, finally reconciled with their long-lost kin. It is this future that no one saw coming. It is this future that sprung out of the hopes and fears of all the years. And a people sitting in exile look into their rearview mirror, and they see this story of Joseph, and they find hope for their own futures as well. Because to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been. The way you look at the past impacts the way you step into the future. Now let's just hold up this rearview mirror in this room. when I hold it just right, I can look back to June 21st, 1990, when in this very place, Nelson Mandela made his first visit upon being freed from prison and visiting America. And from this very pulpit, if you look just right, you can hear him saying, you, Riverside, enlisted the most cherished beliefs of your religious calling. You took up the mission of promoting justice and peace and helped people fight against the evil of apartheid. May we hear these words from our rearview mirror and continue to embody them in our future. Or go back even further. Let's turn it just right down there. On April 4th, 1967, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. gave one of his most famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, speeches, where he said these words: "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." I don't know about you, but those words from 1967 feel like they are still ringing in our world today. This is a place where when you adjust the mirror, you can see 90 years of modern-day prophets. In one of his first sermons from this pulpit, Reverend Sloan Coffin preached on May 21st, 1978, and he said this, one of my favorite lines from him: "We must carry on a lover's quarrel with the world, so that when we depart this life, we leave behind a little more truth, a little more justice, a little more peace, a little more beauty than would have been there if we had not cared enough about the human race to quarrel with it. Not for what it is, but for what it might be." Or 2 years ago, the Sunday after the first Women's March, January 22nd, let's adjust the mirror again, our own Pastor Amy Butler stood here and said, "Sometimes being nasty is the same as being holy, and protest can be prayer." These are the words from the rearview mirror of the Riverside Church. May we continue to hear them and follow them into our future. The people of Israel sat in exile, looking at the stories of how God was with them. It inspired them to find hope for the future. It encouraged them in the midst of the pitfalls they found themselves in. And we continue to do the same. I hold this mirror and I see 40 years of the Riverside Maranatha ministry, proudly welcoming all beloved children of God, regardless of gender identity or who you love, into the full inclusion of this community in our world. And for any United Methodists watching right now, please just repeat that sentence and then go make your vote on Tuesday. Our siblings in the United Methodist Church have a big vote this weekend about the ways in which they will or won't include all of God's children. Riverside, thank you for being a beacon of inclusion for everyone. I hold this mirror and I see a prison ministry that advocates for those who are often forgotten. A sojourners ministry who makes regular trips to visit those in ICE detention. A coming home ministry that works to welcome people back into our society after they are released from prison. I hold it just right, and I can just look back to the very beginning of this entire place. 90 years ago, almost, when Fosdick and Rockefeller were setting up this edifice. Fosdick had a couple deal breakers, and we need to make sure we always keep them in our rearview mirror. One of them, he said, was that this church, yes, it's the tallest in the nation, okay, but we must be a church that serves our community. We must provide the necessary social services to the people around us. And Riverside, this church continues to do that. Our social services ministry with a barber training program, a clothing distribution, a food pantry, a shower ministry, a place to sleep at night. This past year alone, let's adjust the mirror again, over 10,000 people were helped because of the social services ministry here at the Riverside Church. To know where you're going, you have to know where you've been. The way you look at the past impacts the ways you step into the future. Now, I don't know about you, but my first real lesson with rearview mirrors came in driver's training. And they taught me, before I put the key in the gas, before I put my foot on the pedal, adjust your mirrors. You don't want to do that while you're driving because suddenly all sorts of problems could happen. Now, why should you adjust your mirrors? Well, the mirrors serve a specific purpose. They help you see your blind spots, the areas you would otherwise miss. When we look into our mirrors, we are confronted with our implicit biases. We can look into our mirrors and realize the times in our past when we haven't gotten it quite right. We can realize the work we are still called to do. You adjust your mirrors so you can see what's around you and drive forward into the future ahead of you. To know where you're going, you have to know where you've been. The way we look at the past, it impacts the way we look into the future. May we be people who look back, learn from the past, are encouraged by the past, and boldly step into the future to which God is calling us. Amen.